of Vincennes, where we will visit an important national memorial to George Rogers Clark. It was Clark's exploits during the early phases of the Revolutionary War that ensured the vast territory now composed of Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin were added to the fledgling United States at the 1783 Treaty of Paris that ended America's struggle for independence. I have written a comprehensive timeline of Clark's expedition in the first volume of my series of the Indiana Timeline. The book, Indiana Timeless Tales, Prehistory to 1781, relates not only Clark's expedition, but a description of the native tribes that inhabited Indiana, early explorations of the future state, and the establishment of Indiana's oldest town, Vincennes. Francis Marie Bissot, Sieur de Vincennes, established the town as a French trading post in 1732. The site of the town was near the place where the Buffalo Trace crossed the Wabash River. Thus, the town was connected to the Great Lakes via the Wabash River, the portage between the Wabash and St. Mary's River, and the Maumee River. The Buffalo Trace connected it with the Ohio River at the site of the Falls of the Ohio. The Wabash flowed into the Ohio River, which in turn is a tributary of the Mississippi. Thus, from Vincennes, one could travel upriver to Lake Erie, southwest to the Mississippi River, and east to the present site of Jeffersonville, Indiana. The French constructed a fort they called Fort Oweyton to defend the village that grew up there. After the British defeated the French during the French and Indian War in 1763, they took over the fort and named it Fort Sackville. Native to Virginia, George Rogers Clark entered the world on November the 19th, 1752, the son of John and Anne Rogers Clark. As a boy, he attended the renowned Donald Robertson School. Founding Father James Madison also attended the school when he was a boy. His grandfather also taught George the useful trade of land surveying. When he was 19 years old, he joined a surveying team that traveled into the virtually uninhabited land of Kentucky. During these years, he explored Kentucky and developed a knowledge of the language and culture of the various native tribes that inhabited the region. When hostilities broke out in the Revolutionary War, Henry Hamilton, governor of Detroit, began encouraging the tribes to attack the new settlements in Kentucky. In 1777, Clark sent spies into the frontier, called the Illinois country at that time, to investigate his suspicions that the commanders of those posts at Vincennes on the Wabash, Cahokia, and Kaskaskia on the Mississippi River were inciting the violence. On June the 22nd, 1777, his spies returned and confirmed his suspicions. Clark had been formulating plans to attack and capture these posts, which were not heavily garrisoned. Clark knew that he could take these widely separated posts with just a few highly trained men and the proper supplies. In late 1777, Clark traveled to Williamsburg, Virginia, to present his plan to Virginia Governor Patrick Henry. Governor Henry approved his plan to capture the Illinois country for Virginia. So, under the greatest secrecy, Clark began gathering the men and supplies he would need for his daring mission. Clark had expected to recruit 350 men. However, many did not wish to leave their families to the depredations of the natives. Thus, Clark departed on his expedition on May the 12th, 1778, with 150 men organized into 4 companies. The company traveled to Pittsburgh, where they gathered supplies, after which they continued down the Ohio River to the Falls of the Ohio. Clark and his men arrived at Corn Island near the falls on May the 27th, 1778, and set up a training camp. He sent a message to Colonel John Bowman, senior militia officer in Kentucky, for more men and supplies. Clark chose Corn Island to discourage the deserters. They trained and waited for reinforcements until June the 24th. He received more reinforcements from Colonel Bowman and departed on June the 24th with 175 men organized into 4 companies. About 60 men were too sick to travel and remained behind to garrison the blockhouse Clark had built on the island. Before leaving, Clark received word of the French alliance with the United States, a bit of news he would use to his advantage later on. Clark's men paddled along the north shore of the Ohio River until they reached the site of a ruined fort, where they landed. Clark provisioned his force for a 4-day march to reach Kaskaskia on the Mississippi River. The 109-mile march took 6 days, so when they arrived at the town at twilight, they had gone without food for 2 days. They resolved to take the fort or die. They found the British had deserted the fort in 1775 and did not return, leading the residents without a government. conditions in the village approached anarchy. When Clark's men approached the town and informed the French residents of the treaty between France and the United States, the French surrendered without firing a shot. Clark had captured the first of his 3 targets without losing a man. Clark next sent his second of command, Joseph Bowman, to capture Cahokia with a 30-man force. Bowman found this post also devoid of British troops. He informed the French residents of that settlement of the alliance, and they too surrendered with no resistance on July the 6th, 1778. From his base at Kaskaskia, Clark sent Father Pierre Jabalt to Vincennes with about 30 men to capture Vincennes. With no British force in residence, the French eagerly surrendered Fort Sackville to the Americans. The Americans renamed Fort Sackville to Fort Patrick Henry. Clark had now captured 3 British posts without firing a shot, except to bag game along the route. Governor Henry Hamilton learned of the capture of Vincennes in August 1778 from a French fur trader that was trading in Detroit. He determined to recapture the post. However, his resources were thin due to the raging rebellion along the Atlantic seaboard. He managed to collect a force of about 175 men, which included about 60 native warriors. Most of his force consisted of French militia, whom he did not trust. He departed from Detroit on October the 7th, 1778. He used the standard route of ascending the Maumee River to Fort Wayne and up the St. Mary's River to Portage to the Wabash River. He arrived at Fort Patrick Henry on December the 17th, 1778. Clark had placed Captain Leonard Helm in command of the fort with about 60 French militia. These men had deserted prior to Hamilton's arrival. Thus, Helm had only himself and 3 others to defend the fort. Upon hearing Hamilton's demand to surrender, Helms pointed a cannon at the fort's entrance. He held a bottle of whiskey in his hand and a match near the cannon's fuse. Then he invited Hamilton to discuss terms of surrender. During the negotiations, Helm convinced Hamilton that Helm commanded a much larger force. After achieving favorable terms, Helm surrendered to Hamilton, who was enraged when he discovered the tiny force that had opposed him. Believing that the Americans would not launch an expedition to retake the fort in the dead of winter, Hamilton allowed most of his soldiers to go back to Detroit, while he took up his winter quarters with a defending force of about 30 men. French fur trader Francis Vigo, unaware that the British had recaptured Vincennes, traveled to the village to find it once more held by the British. An ardent American supporter, Vigo took note of the size of the British force and how it was situated. The British captured him, but released him after forcing him not to go to Clark's headquarters. Vigo promised to return to St. Louis directly. After his release, he did return to St. Louis to fulfill his promise. However, he then undertook the 50-mile journey to Kaskaskia to inform Clark. Clark knew that if he left Vincennes in possession of Hamilton, the governor could cut off his line of communications. He immediately made plans to capture the town. He and 180 companions set off on the 180-mile journey through a flooded countryside to Vincennes. At times they waded through waters up to their armpits. They hunted buffalo to provision them during their journey. They arrived on February the 23rd to find that Vincennes was a virtual island, as the river had flooded the area. Upon arrival, Clark contacted the French inhabitants, who dug up gunpowder they had buried to keep it out of British hands. They gave him the powder and informed him that Hamilton was confident that Clark would not try to cross the flooded icy prairies in winter and had not dispatched any spies. Thus, the British were completely aware of Clark's arrival. Clark's men surrounded the fort. Using many ruses, Clark made it appear that he had a much larger force than he had. Clark had a number of sharpshooters armed with a famed Kentucky long rifle. These men kept up a hot, accurate fire on the fort's walls, forcing the British defenders to keep their heads down. Under this cover of fire, other men began tunneling under the fort to plant explosives. They also built entrenchments and barricades against the British counterattack. Hamilton agreed to surrender negotiations, which took place in a nearby church. Clark demanded an unconditional surrender, which Hamilton refused and returned to the fort. A band of Amerindian warriors, unaware of the Americans' presence, wandered into their midst. Clark captured them and had them tomahawked to death in front of the fort's defenders. The ploy worked, as it demoralized the small force, after which Hamilton reluctantly surrendered. At 10 o'clock a.m. on February the 25th, 1779, Hamilton marched his men out of the fort. The British laid down their arms and surrendered. Clark's feat dramatically changed the course of the war in the West. as Americans now held the three strategic points in the Illinois country. The native attacks in Kentucky slowed dramatically, and Clark sent Governor Hamilton back along the trace to the Falls of the Ohio as a prisoner. Situated along the banks of the Wabash River, the George Rogers Clark National Memorial features a massive granite memorial which commemorates the conquest of the old Northwest Territory. It is the largest national monument outside Washington, D.C. The memorial is located at the site of the former British Fort Sackville, which was captured by George Rogers Clark and his army of 170 frontiersmen and Frenchmen. The moment of the fort's surrender on February the 25th, 1779, marks the birth of the United States north of the Ohio River. Park staff are available to give tours during hours of operation. The park's visitor center is handicap accessible and features exhibits, a gift shop, and a 30-minute movie presentation. To visit it, you want to go to the George Rogers Clark National Memorial Park, 401 South 2nd Street, Vincennes, Indiana. On the web, just go to nps.gov/GERO or phone 812-882-1776. You can find out more about Clark's exploits and other events in early Indiana history by purchasing the book Indiana's Timeless Tales, Prehistory to 1781.
Now remember,
you can find it on my website, www.mossifeetbooks.com, on the Indiana History Timeline category. Just scroll down the categories, click Indiana History Timeline, and you have it. There are currently 5 books in the series. I am right now working on almost finished with the 6th book, which will end when the Indiana Territory enters the 3rd stage of territorial government in December 1811. It would remain in the 3rd stage until it achieved statehood in 1816. You will find links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and other online book retailers. You may choose to purchase the book in ebook or softbound versions. An audiobook version is available on Google Play. You can also order the book direct from me, the author, on the webpage. If you wish me to sign the book, just send me an email to mossifeetbooks@gmail.com requesting the signed book and instructions on how you want me to address it. Note, if you send me an email, I will add you to my contact list. Readers on the list will receive an email from me announcing when I publish a new book. If you do not want me to add you to the list, tell me and I will not add you. Listeners to this podcast that want email notification on my new releases can just send me an email requesting addition to this list. You can choose to have your name removed at any time. If you browse the website, you will find dozens of sample chapters, one for each of my books. These podcasts also appear as videos on YouTube. I will include a video presentation of how the musket was loaded and fired on that video. Just search for Indiana Places and History on YouTube or search for Mossy Feet Books. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for listening.
Folks are shooting at you, that's all right. Because there's worse things that could happen to you. And you put that little patch right on there like that. Now, we're going to be shooting over across the river into Illinois, and we found out some time ago those folks over there don't have a sense of humor. And they didn't take too kindly at us shooting at them, and they... So we're going to use imaginary bullets just to pacify them and put that right on top of that patch. Then we're going to draw our rammer. We're going to drive all of that down the barrel. Patch the ball down to the bottom of the barrel.
All this wind, you better aim a little farther to the left. Yeah. Well, the wind does
Have an effect? Yes, it does.
Should we move?
Okay. And there's one last thing I have to do here, but before I do that, I will mention that with this wind, I've had some problems. These are excellent guns. These flintlocks. Show you a little bit more about how it works here in just a second. But back in the day, at times they would call off because the weather was too bad. Now that seems kind of odd, calling off a war, a battle, because of bad weather. But they did, because why? If your powder gets wet, you can't shoot. If your flint is wet, your pan's wet, Can't get your powder in there. Water gets down in your barrel, it gets wet, you can't shoot. There's all number of environmental things that can go wrong that's going to affect you being able to shoot at your enemy. So what's going to happen is I've got powder now down in the bottom of the barrel. And I've got the pan in here, same little pan that was in the musket. And in the side of the barrel is a little hole called a vent hole. And what's going to happen is I'm going to put powder in that pan, and I'm going to shut that hammer, which is a piece of hardened steel. Right up here I have a piece of flint. That flint's going to come down, hit that piece of hardened steel, cause a spark. That's going to fly up. Spark's going to fly into the pan, shoot through the vent hole, or engage the powder in the bottom of the barrel, and finally you're going to get an explosion, and hopefully you're going to shoot your bullet out. Now remember, this is taking a minute to do, and the folks who know are still shooting the entire time. So now what I have to do is prime. And back in the day I would have probably just used my main horn, but I'm going to use a small priming horn. And now we're set to go. Okay, what I'm going to do, I want you all to stay right where you are. I'm going to take a few steps right out this way, and I'm going to give a command. Back in the day, if you were firing that musket, you would have probably heard a command to make ready, present, fire, but I actually have a rifle. Our only command would probably have been load and fire at will, because we fired a little differently. We were firing at specific targets, and the word take aim was just coming into the military manuals at the time. But because I'm using a rifle, I'm going to say make ready, take aim, fire. And immediately after I fire, I'm going to pull the trigger, and hopefully, if everything goes well, I'll have a shot. Make ready, take aim, fire!
He didn't hit that rock over there.